The sun blazed over the dusty village square as a deep, rumbling sound shook the ground. Heads turned. Children stopped their games. Elders paused mid-conversation. From the horizon, a long line of black SUVs rolled into the village, their polished bodies gleaming like wet coal under the midday sun. The villagers gasped. Cars like these had never driven into Obion before. At the front of the convoy, a sleek, jet-black jeep slowed to a stop. The door opened slowly, and a tall woman stepped out. She wore a flowing white lace dress and gold jewelry that caught the sunlight like fire. Her skin was glowing, her smile calm, but her eyes were sharp as a hawk's. Gasps rippled through the crowd as whispers began to race from mouth to mouth. Is that a dunny?" one old woman muttered. "No. A dunny disappeared years ago," another said. "But, look at her face, it's her." People stared in awe, their eyes darting from her beautiful gown to the heavy gold bangles around her wrists, to the convoy of vehicles behind her. Then from the crowd a frail man pushed forward, his clothes dusty and his eyes sunken. It was her uncle, Alani, the man who had sold her when she was just a girl, for 2 bags of rice. The moment his eyes met hers, his legs trembled. He staggered back, his mouth opening but no words coming out. Adunni took a slow step toward him. "You thought you would never see me again, uncle," she said softly, her voice dripping with something that made the air feel heavy. "But I came back." She stopped just a few feet away from him. The villagers stood frozen, sensing that something important, something long buried, was about to explode into the open. Her hand tightened around the golden fan she held. "Do you remember what you did to me?" she asked. The old man's lips shook. Sweat ran down his forehead. Adunni's gaze didn't waver. "Let me remind you. Obion was a village that thrived on 2 things: the earth beneath their feet and the ties between their people. The land was rich with yam farms, cassava fields, and thick palm trees that whispered in the evening breeze. Neighbors greeted each other with laughter, children played in the red dust, and the market square on Saturdays was a festival of colors. Women in bright wrappers, traders calling out their goods, the smell of roasted corn and fried plantain filling the air. In Obion, everyone belonged to everyone. If your child misbehaved, the neighbor would scold them before you even heard of it. If you were short of food, the woman next door would bring you a calabash of soup without waiting to be asked. It was a village where trust was not just a word, it was the way people lived. But that trust could also be a weapon in the wrong hands. Adunni was only 11 when her life began to change. She was small for her age, but her eyes carried a light that drew people to her. Her laughter could be heard across the compound when she played with her friends. She lived with her uncle, Alani, after her parents died in a sickness that swept through the neighboring town. Alani was her father's younger brother, and at first, everyone thought he was doing the noble thing by taking her in. But people began to notice things. Adunni always looked tired. She was the one who fetched water from the stream, cooked the evening meal, and swept the compound before sunrise. The other children in the family went to school, but Adunni was often left behind to work. Still, she never complained. She had learned early that complaining only brought more trouble. There was a time, though, when she found joy in little things: helping Mama Saad sell bread in the mornings, listening to the traveling storytellers who came during festivals, or simply sitting by the stream to feel the cool water on her toes. That peace began to crack one Harmattan morning. The air was dry, and the wind carried fine dust that clung to skin and lips. Adunni had been sent to the market to help her uncle's wife, Ayate, sell groundnuts. Business was slow, so she sat quietly watching people come and go. That's when she overheard 2 men talking under the shade of a mango tree. "I hear rice is expensive in the next town," one said. "Very," the other replied. 2 bags can buy almost anything now. Some people are even trading unusual things." They laughed in a way that made Adunni's stomach twist, though she didn't understand why. She thought nothing more of it, until she noticed her uncle speaking to one of those same men later that evening. They stood far from the compound, but she could see the man nodding, his eyes flicking toward her. Something in his look made her uneasy. That night, she dreamed of being carried away from the village, her cries swallowed by the wind. She woke up sweating, her heart pounding. She shook her head and told herself it was just a bad dream. But in the days that followed, she noticed her uncle watching her more closely. And when the strange man returned to the village 1 week later, her uncle's smile was too wide, his handshake too long. She didn't know it yet, but the walls of her world were closing in. One evening, after she had finished pounding yam for dinner, her uncle called her into the back room. His voice was unusually soft. "Dunny," he said, "you will go on a small trip tomorrow. Someone in the next village will take care of you. You will have food and clothes, and you will help them with their work." Her heart skipped. "But what about school?" "You don't need to worry about that," he said sharply. "Just do as I say." She nodded, but inside fear began to grow. She didn't know where she was going or why. She didn't even get the chance to ask. 'Cause the next day she was gone. The morning air was thick with fog when Alani shook Dunny awake. She rubbed her eyes, still heavy with sleep, but his rough tone made her sit up quickly. "Get dressed. We're leaving now," he said, avoiding her gaze. She tied her worn wrapper around her waist and followed him quietly out of the compound. The village was still asleep, except for a few roosters calling to the rising sun. Alani walked fast, his steps long, forcing her to almost run to keep up. When they reached the edge of the village, Dunny saw a man waiting beside an old donkey cart loaded with 2 large, tightly tied sacks. She recognized him immediately. It was the man she had seen speaking to her uncle in secret. The man smiled in a way that didn't feel warm. "So this is her," he said. Alani nodded, his face tight. "Yes, as we agreed." The man reached into the cart and patted the 2 large sacks. "Here's your payment." Dunny's eyes widened. Even in the dim light, she could tell what those sacks contained: rice. 2 full bags of it. Her uncle stepped forward and helped the man lift them off the cart. The sound of the grains shifting inside seemed to echo in her head. Her voice trembled. "Uncle, why is he giving you rice?" Alani didn't look at her. "Be quiet." The man grabbed her small wrist. "Come," he said, pulling her toward the cart. Dunny's legs locked. "Where are we going?" "I don't want to go." She struggled, but the man's grip tightened like an iron chain. "Stop it," Lonnie barked. "You will do as you're told." Tears blurred her vision as she turned to him. "Uncle, please. I want to stay here." He didn't answer. He didn't even glance at her. Instead, he turned his back, lifted the rice sacks onto his shoulder, and began walking away. Her heart shattered. This was the man who was supposed to protect her. The man her parents had trusted with her life. And now, he was trading her like she was nothing more than a goat in the market. The man pushed her into the cart. The wooden planks were cold and rough under her skin. She watched her uncle's figure grow smaller and smaller until he disappeared completely, swallowed by the mist. The cart began to move, its wooden wheels creaking with each turn. The village she had known all her life faded behind her, and with it, the little sense of safety she had left. 4 hours, they traveled along winding paths through tall grasses and silent trees. The man didn't speak, and Dunny didn't dare ask where they were going. But deep inside, a voice told her this journey was not meant for her good. By afternoon, they arrived in a small, unfamiliar settlement. The houses were mud-walled, the roofs made of rusted zinc sheets that rattled in the wind. The man dragged her to a compound where an older woman sat peeling cassava. "She's the one," he told the woman. "Feed her and put her to work." The woman's eyes scanned Dunny from head to toe, like she was inspecting a new chicken she had just bought. "She'll do," the woman said simply. And just like that, Dunny's new life began. A life of endless work, little food, and no kindness. From sunrise to sunset, she fetched water, swept the compound, washed clothes, and helped in the farm. Her hands grew calloused, and her laughter disappeared. At night, she lay on a thin mat in a corner of the kitchen, listening to the crickets outside, wondering if anyone in her village even missed her. Back in Obion, the villagers noticed her absence. A few whispered questions floated in the air, but Alani always had answers. She went to live with relatives in another town, he would say, smiling. Most believed him. After all, who would suspect an uncle of selling his own niece? But Mama Saad, the bread seller, wasn't convinced. She remembered seeing the strange man in the village before, and she remembered the uneasy look on Aduni's face that day in the market. She began asking quiet questions, determined to know the truth. Meanwhile, in the strange village, Aduni began to learn the hard truth about survival. She could either let this life break her or find a way out. One moonlit night, as she sat outside scrubbing cassava roots, she overheard a conversation between the old woman and a neighbor. Her uncle said she's an orphan, the woman chuckled, and that he was hungry. 2 bags of rice in exchange for the girl. A good trade if you ask me. The words struck her like a knife. Now she knew, without any doubt, her uncle had sold her. She put down the cassava, her hands trembling. Her young mind could not fully understand the depth of the betrayal, but one thing became clear. If she stayed here, she might never see her home again. That night, she whispered to herself under the stars, "I will leave this place. I don't know how. I don't know when. But one day, I will go back, and he will see me again." Little did she know, that night's vow would shape the rest of her life. The next morning began like any other. Before the first rooster crowed, Aduni was already on her feet, carrying 2 heavy clay pots to fetch water from the stream. The air was still dark, the moonlight barely lighting the path, but she knew every step now. She had walked it hundreds of times. She filled the pots, balancing one on her head and holding the other in her arms, her small frame bending under the weight. As she walked back, her eyes caught movement in the bushes. For a moment she froze, thinking it might be a snake. But then, from the shadows, a young woman stepped out. She had bright, alert eyes and carried a bundle of firewood on her head. "You're not from this village," the woman said softly, studying her. Aduni hesitated, wondering if she should answer. Finally she whispered, "No. My uncle sent me here." The woman's gaze softened. "Or sold you here?" she asked bluntly. Aduni's eyes widened, and she almost dropped the water pot. She didn't reply, but the woman nodded knowingly. "I'm Ifioma. I came here years ago the same way you did. Escape. Now I come through here sometimes to sell firewood to the market women." A spark of hope lit in Aduni's chest. "You escaped." Fioma leaned closer. "Yes, and you can too. But not now. You're too watched. You need to gain their trust first. Wait for the right moment." Her voice was low but firm, and before Aduni could ask more, she disappeared into the trees, leaving the girl with more questions than answers. For weeks, Aduni thought about what Ifioma said. She started working harder, speaking less, and avoiding unnecessary attention. Slowly, the old woman began to trust her, even sending her alone to the market to sell cassava. That was when Aduni's plan began to form. One market day, she took a different route and found Ifioma sitting under a mango tree, peeling an orange. They talked quickly like people who knew time was short. Ifioma told her of a woman in the next town, Mama Ajiro, who helped girls escape bad homes and find work. "She's strict, but she will keep you safe," Ifioma promised. "If you can get to her, you'll be free." The thought of freedom burned in Aduni's mind for days. She began watching the movements of the old woman she worked for, noting when she was busiest, when she napped, and when the compound gate was left open. One night the perfect chance came. The old woman had visitors, and they stayed talking deep into the night, drinking palm wine. Everyone was distracted. Aduni's heart pounded as she slipped out of the kitchen and crept to the gate. She was just about to push it open when a deep voice stopped her. "Where do you think you're going?" Her heart froze. She turned slowly to see the man who had brought her here, the same one who had taken her from her uncle's hands. He was leaning in the shadows, watching her with a sly smile. "You think you can just walk away," he said, stepping forward. "Your uncle got his rice. Got you. That's how it works." Aduni's legs trembled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The man's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Go back inside before I make sure you never try this again. Her stomach sank. The escape she had dreamed of was slipping away. She turned slowly toward the kitchen, feeling as though a heavy chain was tightening around her. But as she reached the doorway, she clenched her fists. If she couldn't escape tonight, she would try again. And again. Because one thing was certain. She was not meant to live and die in this place. But what she didn't know was that the next opportunity would come in a way she never expected. And it would be dangerous enough to cost her life. 3 weeks passed after that failed escape, and the fear in Aduni's chest had hardened into something sharper. Determination. She learned to move like the wind, quiet and unnoticed, but her eyes were always open. One late afternoon, as she was returning from the stream, the sky turned dark too quickly. Heavy clouds gathered, and the air became heavy and still. People in the village began hurrying home, calling their children inside. Aduni quickened her steps, but before she reached the compound, she heard shouting in the distance. The noise came from the main road, the one that led to the next town. Curiosity pulled her toward it. As she got closer, she saw a small crowd gathered around an overturned cart. A man groaned in pain, his goods scattered in the dirt. 2 women knelt beside him, trying to help. It was then she saw it. One of the women's baskets had spilled open, and among the yams and peppers was a piece of bright cloth she recognized instantly. Fioma's wrapper. Her eyes darted around until she spotted her. Fioma stood apart from the crowd, watching everything with sharp eyes. When their gazes met, she gave a quick, subtle nod. Aduni's heart raced. She knew this wasn't a coincidence. Fioma was here for a reason. She approached slowly, pretending to help gather the spilled yams. When she got close enough, Fioma whispered, "Tonight, be ready. There's a festival in the next town. The old woman will go. You'll leave then." Aduni swallowed hard. "How?" Fioma slipped something small into her palm, a folded piece of paper with directions written in shaky letters. "Follow this road. When you see the big irako tree, turn left. Mama Ejiro's house is 3 huts from the river." Before Aduni could say more, the shouting from the crowd grew louder, and Fioma melted away like smoke. That night, just as Fioma had said, the old woman left with her friends for the festival. The compound was almost empty, the air filled with the distant sound of drums from the other town. Aduni's hands shook as she grabbed a small bundle of clothes and the piece of paper. She slipped out of the gate and into the night. The road was dark, and the wind whispered through the trees like voices calling her name. She walked fast, glancing over her shoulder every few steps. When she reached the irako tree, she turned left just as the paper said. Her feet hurt and her throat was dry, but she didn't stop. The sound of rushing water told her she was close to the river, and to Mama Ejiro's house. But just as she stepped into the clearing near the river, a shadow moved in front of her. It was the man who had brought her to this place. "Well, well," he said, smiling coldly. "I knew you'd try again." Panic shot through her veins. She looked left, water. She looked right, thick forest. There was nowhere to run without being caught. The man stepped closer. "Come quietly, or I'll make sure you never walk these roads again." Her mind screamed for a way out, and in that split second she realized, if she didn't take a risk now, she might never have another chance in her life. She took one deep breath, and ran straight toward the river. The man shouted and lunged after her, but her feet were already splashing into the water. The current was strong, pulling her forward, but she fought it with every kick, her lungs burning. She didn't know if she could make it to the other side. She didn't even know if she could swim far enough before he caught her. But she knew one thing, she would rather drown than go back. The cold water swallowed her whole. For a moment, she couldn't tell which way was up or down. Her ears filled with the roar of the current, and her chest burned as she fought to keep her head above water. She kicked hard, her thin arms slicing through the dark river. The man's angry shouts echoed behind her, but they grew fainter with each second. She didn't dare look back. Every drop of strength she had was poured into staying afloat. Then her foot hit something solid. The riverbed. She pushed off with all her might and staggered onto the opposite bank, coughing and gasping for breath. Her wrapper was heavy and dripping, clinging to her skin, but she forced herself to keep moving. Through the trees ahead, she saw a faint light. She stumbled toward it, each step heavy, until she emerged into a small clearing. There it was, a simple mud house with a zinc roof, smoke curling gently from its chimney. The sight filled her with a strange mix of relief and fear. She knocked on the wooden door, her knuckles trembling. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a tall, broad woman with a wrapper tied high above her chest and a wooden spoon in her hand. Her eyes scanned Adunni from head to toe in one sweeping glance. "You're not from here," the woman said, her voice firm. Adunni swallowed hard. "Are you Mama Ejiro?" The woman's brow lifted slightly. "Who sent you?" "I Fioma," Adunni whispered. She said, "You help girls like me." Mama Ejiro's eyes softened almost imperceptibly. She opened the door wider. "Come inside before someone sees you." The warmth of the small home hit Adunni immediately. The air smelled of boiling yam and palm oil. She sat near the fire, shivering, as Mama Ejiro handed her a dry cloth to wrap around herself. Over the next hour she told her story, about her uncle, the 2 bags of rice, the strange man, and the endless work. Mama Ejiro listened in silence, her face unreadable. When Adunni finished, Mama Ejiro nodded slowly. "You're safe here for now. But safety is not enough. You must learn to stand on your own feet. If you don't, the world will swallow you again." Those words sank deep into Adunni's heart. Over the weeks that followed, Mama Ejiro taught her everything from cooking for large gatherings to keeping market accounts. She introduced her to women traders who taught her bargaining skills and how to spot cheats. She made her wake before sunrise to sweep, fetch water, and cook, not as punishment but as training. "Work is not your enemy," Mama Ejiro often said. "Ignorance is." But one afternoon, as Adunni was returning from the market, she saw something that froze her in her tracks. Across the street, leaning casually against a palm tree, was the man who had tried to drag her back. His eyes locked on hers, and a slow smile spread across his face. He hadn't given up. He had found her again. Adunni's heart raced. She turned and hurried down the narrow alley toward Mama Ejiro's house, but even as her feet moved, her mind knew, this was no longer just about surviving. She would have to fight for her freedom. And to do that she needed more than skills. She needed power. The days after seeing the man again were the longest Adunni had ever lived. Every time she stepped outside Mama Ejiro's compound, her eyes scanned the streets, searching for him. Sometimes she saw nothing. Other times she caught glimpses. A shadow near the market stalls, the curve of a smile under a mango tree. He was like a snake, showing himself just enough to remind her he was still there. One night, the fear followed her into her dreams. She saw herself back in the old woman's compound, scrubbing cassava under the hot sun while her uncle stood nearby, chewing roasted yam and grinning. She woke up sweating, her chest tight, her breath shallow. The next morning Mama Ejiro noticed. "You've been jumpy," she said, ladling out a plate of hot yam porridge. "What's chasing you?" Adunni hesitated. She didn't want to seem ungrateful or weak, but she told Mama Ejiro about seeing the man again. Mama Ejiro's expression turned dark. "That one is trouble. He won't stop unless you give him a reason to." "What reason?" Adunni asked. "To fear you." The words struck her like lightning. Fear. She was the one who had always been afraid. Afraid of her uncle, afraid of strangers, afraid of losing whatever little safety she found. But the idea that she could make someone fear her, it felt strange and powerful. That same day, Mama Ejiro called 2 women from the market, Auntie Beezy and Gozi, both known for their sharp tongues and sharper elbows. "Teach her," Mama Ejiro said. What followed over the next weeks was unlike anything Adunni expected. Auntie Beezy taught her how to stand her ground when bargaining, never blinking, never flinching. Ngozi taught her how to read people's intentions just by the way they walked or the tone in their voice. Mama Ejiro herself showed her how to hide money, keep secrets, and think 3 steps ahead of anyone trying to use her. She who owns nothing can be taken, Mama Ejiro told her one evening, but she who owns her mind can never be owned. Still, no lesson could prepare her for what happened one stormy night. The rain was falling in thick sheets, the wind rattling the zinc roof. Mama Ejiro had gone to deliver food to a family in the next village, leaving Adunni to watch the house. She was in the kitchen warming a pot of soup when she heard a noise, a slow, deliberate knock on the door. Her stomach dropped. No one came to visit at this hour. She crept to the door and listened. The knock came again, heavier this time. Then a voice. "Open up, little bird. You can't hide forever." It was him. Her hands shook. She could run to the back and disappear into the night, but she knew he would keep coming. And one day he might catch her far from safety. Something inside her shifted. She thought of Mama Ejiro's words. She thought of the day her uncle turned his back on her for 2 bags of rice. She thought of all the nights she had promised herself she would never be powerless again. She opened the door. The man stood there, dripping wet, his grin wide. "That's better. Now let's." Before he could finish, Adunni threw the pot of hot soup straight at his chest. He screamed, stumbling backward, clutching at the scalding liquid. "You will never own me again," she shouted, her voice steady, cutting through the rain. The man glared at her through the steam rising from his soaked clothes, but for the first time, there was something else in his eyes, hesitation. He turned and ran into the darkness. Adunni stood in the doorway, her chest heaving. She didn't know if he would come back. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time she felt it, power. What she didn't know was that this act of defiance would set off a chain of events that would take her far beyond Mama Ejiro's house, and into a life she could never have imagined. From that stormy night onward, something in Adunni changed. She was no longer the frightened girl who waited for rescue. She had become the girl who made her own escape. The man never came back. Maybe it was the burns from the soup, or maybe it was the look in her eyes that night, but his shadow disappeared from her life. Still, Mama Ejiro warned her. Victory is not just surviving the enemy. It is becoming strong enough that no one dares to make you a victim again. Adunni took those words seriously. She threw herself into learning everything Mama Ejiro and the other market women could teach her. She learned the art of bulk buying and reselling at a profit. She learned to travel with goods between towns, negotiating with traders twice her age without flinching. She saved every coin she earned, hiding them in secret places only she knew. Years passed. She grew into a young woman with a sharp mind and a strong back. Her reputation in the market spread. People called her Adunni the Wise, because no one could trick her into a bad trade. One day Mama Ejiro sat her down. "You've learned enough to stand on your own. Now you must decide. Will you stay here or will you build your life elsewhere?" Adunni didn't hesitate. "I want to see the world beyond this village. I want to trade in the big cities." Mama Ejiro smiled. "Then you must go where the biggest market lives, Lagos." The journey to Lagos was not easy. The city was a beast, bigger, faster, and louder than anything she had known. But Adunni was ready. She worked under a textile merchant for 2 years, learning the business from the inside. Soon she saved enough to start her own small shop. Her first shop was no bigger than a goat pen, but her goods were high quality, and her customers stayed loyal. She reinvested her profits, opening another shop, then another. She began importing fabrics from Ghana and Togo, building a network of suppliers. By the time she was 25, Adunni owned a warehouse, employed 12 people, and was supplying fabrics to traders across the country. She dressed in fine lace and gold, not for vanity, but as a reminder to herself of how far she had come. Yet, despite her success, there was one thing she had never done: return to Obion. Sometimes, when the night was quiet and the city lights glowed beyond her window, She would remember the smell of roasted corn in the market square, the sound of children playing in the dust, and the face of her uncle turning away with his bags of rice. One morning, as she sat in her office reviewing shipment orders, she made a decision. She would go back, not in secret, not in shame, but in triumph. She called her driver. "Prepare the convoy. We are going home." The news spread quickly among her workers. Some thought it was just a visit. But Adunni knew this was more than that. It was the closing of a chapter she had been writing since the day she left. The next week, under the blazing midday sun, a line of gleaming black SUVs began the long journey toward Obion. Inside the lead car, Adunni sat in silence, watching the familiar red earth roads appear once again. Her heart beat steady. This was no longer the frightened child's return. This was the return of a woman who had turned betrayal into power. And in the village, her uncle had no idea what was coming. The convoy's engines rumbled like distant thunder as they rolled into Obion. Dust swirled around the tires, drawing every eye in the village. Children ran alongside the cars, laughing and shouting. Women paused in pounding yam to shade their eyes and stare. Men straightened from their farm tools, murmuring among themselves. When the lead SUV stopped in the village square, all movement seemed to pause. The door opened and Adunni stepped out. Her wrapper was a rich emerald lace, her head tie perfectly tied. Gold bangles clinked on her wrists, and a soft perfume floated in the air around her. But it wasn't her beauty that made the crowd fall silent. It was the quiet power in her presence. Some recognized her instantly, their eyes widening in disbelief. Others whispered, "Who is she? Is she a chief's daughter?" From the back of the crowd, a thin figure pushed forward. His hair was grayer now, his clothes faded, but the shape of his face was the same. "Lonnie." The moment their eyes met, his steps faltered. Adunni's voice carried through the square, calm but edged with steel. "Uncle." Alani swallowed hard. "Adunni." She raised a hand. "No. Today you will not speak first. Today you will listen." The crowd grew still, sensing the weight of what was about to unfold. "I was 11 when you sold me," she began, her voice steady but not loud. "2 bags of rice. That was my value to you." A ripple of shock ran through the villagers. Gasps, murmurs, and the shaking of heads filled the air. "You did not think of my parents, your own brother and his wife. You did not think of what might happen to me. You thought only of your hunger." She took a step closer. "But you see me now, uncle. I did not die. I did not break. I built my life with my own hands." She turned to the crowd. "I came back today not to shame you all, but to show you this. Betrayal can destroy a person, but it can also make them stronger. And no one, not even family, has the right to treat another life like it is worth less than a meal." Alani's head bowed. His lips trembled. "Adunni, I was wrong. I have lived with that shame for years." Adunni studied him for a long moment, then said, "I will not punish you, uncle. Life has already done that. But you will do something for me. You will tell this story to every child in this village. So they will know that no hunger, no greed, is worth another human life." The villagers nodded, murmuring their agreement. Then, Adunni reached into the car and brought out a large sack. She placed it in front of him. "Here, Grace. More than 2 bags. Enough for you and your family for months. Take it, and never again trade a soul for food." Her words hung in the air as she turned and walked back to her car. The crowd parted, some touching her arm as she passed, others calling blessings after her. As the convoy rolled away, children chased it, waving and laughing. In that moment, harmony returned to Obion, not because the past was erased, but because its lesson was now etched into every heart.